Holy smokes! Elden Ring is real, and I played it.
Gamer Braves.
What's up guys, this is Wan Amirul from Gamer Braves, and I am very excited to bring you today's video. Thanks to our friends at Bandai Namco Entertainment, I can share with you just how far the next chapter of Miyazaki's Berserk fanfiction has come. I'm in this weird place with the Soul series because I'm not exactly like those people who were clamoring at the bit for Elden Ring when that first trailer came out 3 years ago. However, once I actually got my hands on it, I realized that it's been a while since the last Souls game, and I've just been playing a bunch of Zelda-likes and Metroidvanias trying to get my next hit. What I'm going to do here is split this video into two parts. If you just want to know what's new in Elden Ring, you can skip to later in the video. But first, we're going to talk about my actual feelings with the game. Deal? Deal.
It is done.
So Elden Ring is literally just Dark Souls 4. I've always really liked the Soulsborne games because even though there's no actual lore connection between Demon Souls, Dark Souls, Bloodborne, etc., they are very iterative. That is to say, in the sense that ideas that work in one game will carry over into the next game with some improvements. And Elden Ring is pretty much that. It's a lot of steps up from Dark Souls 3, but retains a lot of the same general philosophy in that there's a lot of ways you can solve a problem, compared to Bloodborne's more, you go all in, swing your saw around. That being said, the game does change up a lot with its open world. Admittedly, I'm not the biggest fan of open world in games. Like I mentioned in the Far Cry 6 review, a huge problem is that you can have a world that's just huge for the sake of being huge, and navigating it can be boring. And unfortunately, Elden Ring doesn't exactly quite fix this either. You get this especially in the game's camp segments, where you have to infiltrate camps and kill a bunch of enemies. You suddenly realize that the appeal of the Soulsborne genre is incredibly tailored experiences. For example, imagine like a DM setting up a room in a Dungeons and Dragons session where they say, here are two enemies. Now you have to figure out within your own toolset how you're going to deal with them. You just don't get that with a camp because there's too many variables. In the end, all you end up doing is just sneaking around, backstabbing each of the guards, because if even one of them catches you, they ring the alarm, and now you have to fight 10 of them at once. And anyone who's ever fought a dog in a Souls game knows this combat was not made for more than 3 enemies. The lack of options, in a way, was the charm. Imagine going to a restaurant and then the maitre d' says, have whatever you want. No, I don't want to have whatever I want. I want to know what the chef is good at. I want to have the food that the chef is especially good at doing so that I can take a photo of it and cry because my date never showed up. That being said, it's not all bad with the open world. It does introduce one new thing that I like, which is the catacombs. The catacombs are basically an iteration of the Chalice dungeons from Bloodborne. And when I say they're iterative of the Chalice dungeons, I really mean it in that the structure is almost identical. You go in, you fight a bunch of enemies, you flip a switch, the boss door opens, you kill it, you leave. It's a great system, and I'm glad that it's there. It also fixes my main gripe with the Chalice dungeons, which was that they are randomly generated. Catacombs in Elden Ring are not randomly generated and are purposely built. And if you notice, this is a recurring theme, because I'd rather know that I was getting screwed over by Miyazaki personally instead of a robot that he built. Looking for the catacombs feels great as well because you have to explore the open world and find each one. That being said, there's only one catacomb in the beta, and we'll have to know more about how they differ between catacombs when the full game comes out. On top of that, there's one thing in Elden Ring that only can exist in the open world, so it's not like I want it removed completely because I freaking love this. It's the wandering boss fight. You can just be walking around and a giant banana knight on horseback comes around to kick your butt. In the first area, you'll meet a boss known as the Tree Sentinel, and he's mean. Dude just patrols the area and is a full-on boss fight, complete with a little health bar. The first time you see him, you don't even have access to your horse yet, and trust me, you want your horse for this fight, because this thing's basically a giant 18-wheeler that turns on a dime and hits like, well, an 18-wheeler. From the combat perspective, a lot of the gossip around Elden Ring has been around the jump and the horse. The jump, of course, lets you do jump moves, which are great for breaking the stance of your opponent, and the horse lets you do some sick Dynasty Warrior stuff. However, none of that is important because there's one more mechanic that was not really elaborated in the marketing, which is the new counter hit. mechanic. And I really love how this works. In previous Souls games, when you block with your shield, you kind of go by fighting game rules where you just have to wait for your opponent to do a slow enough move that you have an opening to counterattack. Now, in Elden Ring, when you block an attack, you can hit the heavy button right after the attack to do a counter hit. This is a special move that may look similar to your normal move, but does way more damage. It really changes up the way you look at fights because now you want to identify the pattern and see when is the best part to do your counter hit. You will still take damage in the trade, so it's up to you to decide when's the best time to go for it. My favorite thing about this is that it changes the way two-handed weapons work. Before this, two-handed weapons were kind of a crutch. You two-handed a weapon because you didn't have enough strength to use it. Very rarely did you actually have someone who wanted to two-handed a weapon because they preferred the moveset in two-hand mode versus, just having a free hand to use a shield or whatever. Now, when you're two-handing, you can still block with it like you could in previous games, and you still take damage, but at least you can counter hit for even more damage than you probably took. This isn't the first time they've tried to do this. Both Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne have tried to find a way to make blocking and parrying more intuitive. Bloodborne, of course, had the gun parry, where you had to shoot an opponent in the middle of an attack to open them up. The problem with this was not all guns could parry. I used the cannon in that game, that can't parry. Dark Souls 3 also had this by having the parry window of an attack be in the middle of a combo. If a boss has a 3-hit combo attack, sometimes you want to parry the second hit instead of the first or third one. Again, the problem with that was not all shields could parry, so you had to commit to the parry build if you wanted to do it. With Elden Ring, any weapon can do it since any weapon can block. Even if you're two-handing a Great Lance, ta-da, you can block. It's not even just getting the free hit in. You can also stagger enemies and open them up to what the game calls critical hits, or let's face it, we all call them visceral attacks because that's a cooler name. If you're worried about learning this, don't worry, the game will force you to learn it in the form of Margit the Fell Omen, the one story boss in the demo. He reminds me a lot of Father Gascoigne from Bloodborne in that he is a hard checkpoint for have you learned the rules of the game yet. I can't imagine beating him without using the counter hit mechanic because his moves are fast and long. Obviously we played this before the demo in public, but I can see Margit being the same kind of roadblock that Gascoigne was because yeah, if you haven't learned the rules of the game, he's definitely going to be a problem. For all the talk of the open world, the game still has incredibly tailored legacy dungeons. Seriously, it's so typically Dark Souls in its design. I love it. It's tight, closed spaces, few enemies, and a lot of environmental puzzles that you'll have to deal with, such as exploding barrels and one jerk at the top with a firecracker. You can tell that they included the castle area, specifically just to show you how familiar it is, because it even looks like Bolitarian Palace from Demon Souls, and the only way it could really be more familiar to a Souls fan is if it was a toxic swamp. That's pretty much the big takeaways from me with Elden Ring, but here's a bunch of other assorted new details. The first is your Firekeeper equivalent, Melina the Finger Maiden. Aside from her ridiculous name, she follows you to every single bonfire, and so that means you can now level up at any bonfire. Of course, in the game they're called Sites of Grace, but Souls fans, we know what we're about. Weapon arts from Dark Souls 3 are also back, however they're now merged with ore infusion in the form of Ashes of War. These are items that let you change out the weapon art for all of your weapons, as well as grant certain affinities to your weapon, like raising its dex scaling or doing magic damage. These are two separate things, but they are tied to the individual Ash of War, and you can swap them out at any bonfire. You may have also noticed from the gameplay preview the Ash Summon. These are non-consumable items that you can use, and just like the horse, they are incredibly limited because you can only use them when the game says you can, specifically when you're in an area. I don't like them as much as I thought I would because their main function, I feel, is to balance out the fact that if you suck at stealth in the camps, guess what? You're going to be fighting 10 enemies. So here's an item that summons 5 more enemies to even the tide. That being said, one of the summons lets you summon the dog, the most powerful FromSoft enemy that's ever existed, and so you can use it to, really mess up your enemies. Aside from that, the map also lets you fast travel between any sites of grace you've unlocked. If you die in the open world before reaching the next site of grace, there's also these items called Stakes of Marika, and you can choose whether to resurrect at the last bonfire or at the Stake of Marika. There is a crafting system in the game, but thankfully it's only restricted to the game's consumable items, like throwing daggers or healing for your horse. I really like this because I never really went back to the shop to stock up on 100 throwing knives, so it feels great that you can just make them on the fly by killing a giant jerboa and stealing its bones. From a player class perspective, you've pretty much got your standard fare with a bunch of strength builds and a sorcerer and a cleric. The only real change here is the Enchanted Knight, which somehow combines both the Herald and the Sorcerer from previous Dark Souls games into one of the most broken classes I've ever seen. It's got the spear and shield of the Herald, but instead of a talisman to cast miracles, this time the Herald has sorcery. Magic has always been the Souls game's easy mode because you can just pick off enemies from afar. On top of that, the shield is really good and can parry both magic as well as physical attack. Seriously, it's super good. Healing works like in Dark Souls 3 as well, with the 2 flasks, one for magic, one for healing, and you can apportion them at a bonfire. So if you're like me and don't like using magic, guess what? You've got 4 healing flasks now. You're welcome. I'ma be real with you. I spent my whole weekend on Elden Ring. Of the 3 days, I had to apportion my time around the fact that I was going to play this game in huge binges. Thankfully, if you got access to the beta, you'll be able to jump in too and check it out for yourself. I mean, it's just good, man. Like, I appreciate the Souls games for trying something new, but also, like, we like the Dark Souls games for one reason, and it's good to see that they never stop including it. Even if you didn't get the beta access, the game comes out in February of next year, so it won't be long before you get to try this out for yourself and tell us about, how badly we're doing in the gameplay that you're watching. What are you most looking forward to in Elden Ring? Let us know in the comments below. This has been Wan Amirul from Game of Braves. Don't give up, Skeleton.
Hey there! Thank you so much for watching our videos. Don't forget to give us a subscribe if you'd like to see more, and like so we know what kind of content you want to see. Got suggestions for new content? Let us know in the comments below too. Thank you so much again for watching. Take care, dudes.